So good morning, class. So the group 2 will be presenting the report. So group 2, take it away. Kayo na.
Hey, good morning, ma'am. Good morning, classmates. Um, we are the group 2. So today we're gonna discuss the object and classes in OOP PHP programming or object-oriented programming. So before we discuss the classes or object, first let's gonna answer these questions. These three questions. So what is a class? Any idea, guys? Any idea? Christian Joe Lagrana. Anyone? Maureen.
Yung idea namin about sa class is gagamitin namin to dun sa encapsulation. Parang siya yung first mag-state i-state namin yung class, then yung classmate, yung class name. Parang siya yung template for objects.
Okay. So ayun. Sinabi na ni Maureen na. So second question, what is an object? Any idea, guys? Michelle. Michelle, Mr. Edwin Balang. Do you have any idea of what is an object? So okay. So the third question is what is napanda di panunot yo no inya ti difference na ti class ken object iti OOP PHP programming. Uh, Miss Arlene Padilla. So IG guys, these three questions will tackle our discussion today. We're gonna discuss the class, the object, and their differences. So let's go to the next slide, presented by Miss Joanne Villar.
So, ayun guys, next slide please. Ayan, Ubuntu. So, class or classes. So, a class is a template for objects. So, it serves as a template or blueprint for the creation of several individual objects which are self-contained, independent collections of variables and functions that work together to complete one or more defined tasks. And these individual objects inherit the same basic characteristics and behaviors when created, though some properties may have distinct values for each object. Next slide, please. So, like for example, yung fruit na class. A fruit can have characteristics such as name, color, weight, and so on. So, the values of these properties can be stored in variables such as name, and color. So when the individual objects are created, they inherit all the class attributes and behavior. So, ganon guys. Next, presenter, please.
Object. An individual instance of the data structure defined by a class. We can create multiple objects from a class. Each object has all the properties and methods defined in the class, but they will have different property values. In object-oriented programming or OOP, objects are the things you think about first in designing a program, and they are also the units of code that are eventually derived from the process. In between, each object is made into a generic class of object, and even more generic classes are defined so that objects can share models and reuse the class definition in their code. Each object is instance of a particular own methods or procedures and data variables. Object of a class is created using the new keyword. Next slide, please.
Hello. So I'm gonna explain to you the um, code that contains the object and class. So makikita nyo guys, class, ang ginawa nating class is yung fruit, which contains properties and methods. So nya ba yung properties? Makita tayo mo dyan the image, the dollar name or the variable name and the variable color. So the method is the yung function set name, which kung saan sa function na to is kukuhanin natin yung pangalan ng object. So the second function is ay baliktad pala. The second function is ganun, kukuhanin natin yung pangalan. So to create an object, we will have the new keyword na nasa baba. So nawanti new keyword na awanti object nga maaramid. Siya aja guys. So next slide.
So, difference between class and object. When we say class is the blueprint of an object. It is used to declare and create objects. In object is an instance of a class. Kumbaga, yung class is siya yung nagde-declare kay object at si object naman siya yung um, nag siya yung siya yung siya yung nag kumbaga siya yung create ng Next is no memory is allocated when a class is declared. And the object is memory is allocated as soon as an object is created. Walang memory yung class kasi hindi siya yung hindi mo siya makokontrol kung ano yung pag isa lang yung kumbaga siya lang yung nagde-declare kay object. Si object naman is pwede mo siyang kontrolin kasi siya yung create ni class. Class is a group of similar object. And object is a real entity such as book, car, and etc. Yung class is example is yung bicycle. Yung bicycle literal na bicycle lang yung sinasabi niya at yung object naman is sinasabi niya yung brand, kumbaga example is yung mga yung mga brand ng bicycle, yung mga Korean bike, and class is a logical entity and object is a physical entity. Class can only be declared once and object can be created many times per requirement. Class example can be a car. Object of class can be Mercedes-Benz, Jaguar, and etc. Next activities.
Wait lang. Before you proceed to the activities, kindly show us some coding. Mag-coding kayo, you open your Sublime, and then show us how to create a class, how to create an object, and how to instantiate that object. Kahit yung example nyo na lang kanina, yung fruit ba yun? Yung sa sample code. Paki-code nga yun. Dapat ganun din sa inheritance and then encapsulation. Show me the code. Mag-code kayo mismo para makita ko. Naririnig niyo ako?
Yes.
So try to open your Sublime and then paki-code kahit yung magbigay kayo ng example ng class. And then, syempre, lagyan nyo na rin yun ng properties and then a method and then instantiate it para ma-instantiate natin para mag-declare kayo ng object niya and then instantiate it using our new na keyword natin para ma-instantiate natin yung class natin.
Hello, so ganito guys yung code na. So here, okay. File.
Kayo lang ba? Nag-group 2? Hindi yung isa na hindi nag-report. Si Vanessa, wala na ba si Vanessa Mendoza?
So ate guys, i-code na. Tapos makita yo, I created a class which is named fruit. So I declare the properties which is in public ko, the dollar name and the dollar color. So the class containing properties and methods, diba? So I set the method which is set name, a function which has a name which is set name, and then I inserted the value which is the dollar name. So parang logic lang siya. Sa function na una, nga pala, ang $this, curious kayo kung ano ang $this. So ang $this is parang ano siya, pointer na kapag meron ito dito sa sa function or ikinode nyo siya, parang tas ganun, may parang substitute ba yan? Wait lang, i-run ko na lang. So yun. Ganyan guys yung niya, yung output niya. So, pag magtatanggal tayo, for example, itong new keyword sa object. Then, Control S. So, pag i-refresh natin siya, so magiging error siya. Bakit kaya? Kasi nga, wala nga yung Kaya napaka-importante yung new keyword kapag mag-create kayo ng object. So, ayan. And then, yan. So, eto. Isa pang na-discover ko guys is kahit na for example is papalitan natin dito or walang na insert na value dun sa function, try natin i-run. So ganun guys, magiging siya, magiging or error siya. Anong sabi niya? Unidentified variable $name on line 9. So yun yung mga tinanggal ko. Ito yung sinasabi niya. Wala siyang kumbaga hindi niya ma-identify to $name. So so kailangan natin ng dapat ng value dito na ilalagay. So ayun.
So may question kayo? May question kayo regarding sa code niya? Last, do you have any question?
None, ma'am.
None. So, let me code. Ipapakita ko yan because you put it in one file. Kasi kailangan natin yan i-separate natin yung class natin sa ating index so that if we're going to use our inheritance, encapsulation, abstraction, and full morphism, mas magiging maayos siya. Ayan kasi is I think you copied that in W3 school. And then, nasa isang file lang yung ating class tsaka yung object natin. Supposedly, dapat yung class natin is separated from our object. So, yung mga object natin na makikita dapat siya sa ating index. And then, yung mga class natin is makikita siya separately. And then, we will just require or include that. Wait, ako naman ang mag-present. Wait lang. I'll be creating my new folder. Create muna ako ng folder ko. Ay, may 2A na pala doon. Yun na lang. Gamitin ko na lang yung 2A. Habang naman yung 2A. Wala. Okay, yan na lang yung gagamitin ko, 2A. So that will be my folder. And then, my subline. Subline file. So, I'll be creating muna. Create muna ako ng new file ko. And then, I will save this one as my index. And then, I'll be creating a new file. I'll be naming this as my class. So, S-class na lang. So, ano yung ginamit nyo kanina is fruit, di ba? So, try natin gumawa ng iba. Halimbawa is, you'll be creating an enrollment system for the school. Halimbawa lang. Iba siya nakapag... Iba siya na-save as PHP. Ay, nakafile lang siya. Okay. Ayaw. Save as .php. Ayan. Ayan. Ito pa rin. Save as... Naku,
PHP, ma'am.
PHP, ma'am.
.php. PHP, ay, gano'n. Save. Ayan. So, try nga natin kung lalabas ng HTML. Yan. So, okay na siya. So, ang ating index hindi rin. Save as din natin ng PHP. .php. Kung maglalag konti itong laptop ko, pasensya ha. Try nga natin yung station. Okay na siya. So, first, so, syempre, di ba, we're dealing with classes. So, create muna tayo ng class natin. So, pwede naman yung maging class natin isang ating student. So, pag nag-open tayo ng class, kailangan there's always our closing braces. And then, gawa tayo ng properties natin. So, public muna tayo. Kasi yung protected, public protected, and private, normally may explain yan talaga pagdating ng inheritance or encapsulation. Pero mas may enhance siya sa encapsulation. So hopefully, makikita ko yan dun sa reporter natin. Ha. And then, ano ba yung wait lang. Kailangan pala ito is PHP. I forgot. Hindi niya naman pinaalala na naka-PHP po tayo. And so, PHP. Ba't hindi nag-i-wave na agad? Balbalik yung kulay na ako nakulakot din. Then we will close our PHP, of course. So, public. So, ano ba yung common properties ng ating mga student? Of course, kailangan natin yung name. So, yung dollar name natin. Yan. So, next, sunod na gagawin natin is gagawa tayo ng function or yung method natin. Normally, ang ginagamit ko pagdating dito, instead of using the set, halip na mag-set name tayo, why don't we use our construct? Mas maganda kasi na ginagamit yung construct. Kasi yung construct, it will automatically call the function. Kung ano yung ilalagay natin ng mga parameters doon sa function natin, mas madali natin siyang maiko-call. So to do that, we could create our function and then double underscore construct. and then open and close parentheses, and then mag-open tayo ng ating curly braces. So sabi ko nga kanina, we need to declare our parameters. So yung unang properties natin is the name. So i-call natin siya. So magkakaroon ngayon ito ng parameter na dollar, ay baka nakakaps lang, na dollar name. Yan. And then, di ba na-mention kanina ni Mr. Del Rosario regarding this? It means to say that the word this is a pointer. Pinopoint niya that this certain name is the value of this certain property or this certain parameter. So, gamitin natin yung this natin to point out that the name is equal to our variable name. Okay na siya. So, di ba sabi ko kanina, ginamit natin sa halip na gamitin natin yung set name, ginamit natin yung under construct. So, we need to get it. Kailangan natin i-get yung value ng name natin. So, to do that, syempre kailangan ulit natin yung function natin. Yan, tapos get info na lang yung gamitin ko. Get info. Mas maganda. Kasi kaya gagamitin ko yung get info para, halimbawa, you want to add more properties. Siyempre, hindi lang naman name yung property ng student natin, di ba? Meron din siyang birthday, may age din siya, may address din siya. So, marami pang mga information kasi na gagamitin natin para sa ating student class. So, pwedeng gamitin na lang natin is function get info para makuha na lang natin lahat ng mga information ng ating student. And then, since ginamit natin yung get info natin, of course, we will be dealing with our return. Kailangan, pag inet natin, i-return din natin kung ano ba yung giniget natin. So, we will be using the word return. And then, syempre, name yung ano natin, yung kinukuha natin, name. And then, concatenate natin. And then, we will be using this one. Copy mo lang itong this name na to. Yan, copy mo lang yung this name na yan. And then semicolon. Next, we will be creating the object. So, okay na tayo dyan sa ating class. So, yan yung class natin. So, yung student class natin, it has the property of a name. So, naiset na natin yung name na yan. So, we will be calling that name. Kung ano yung parameter natin, mako-call natin siya. And then, since nag-set tayo, we will be calling it. So, i-get natin yung information niya and we will be returning that value. Pero hindi pa natin siya mai-return kung wala naman tayong ini-echo, di ba? So, pagdating dito sa ating index, and tayo ng PHP. Yan yung sa PHP. So, of course, since gumamit tayo ng class natin, paano natin i-call? So, kailangan natin gamitin yung include. Yan. So, i-include natin, include once natin, wrong spelling. Include once natin ngayon yung ating sclass.php. Walang code. Or single quote. Maganda. Hindi naman sa string. And then, semicolon. And then, of course, we will be creating our object. Yan. Di ba may mga sarili-sarili tayong ID? Ako, yung ID ko is E1653742. O, di ba, kamisado ko pa. Yan. So, gamitin ko yung ID ko. E1653742. E161 dapat yung hindi na. Kasi 2016 ako nag-enroll. Kaya E16. So kayo, kung anong year kayo nag-enroll, yun yung maging ano nyo. E20, E21, ganyan. Yan. So meron na tayong object. So we will be instantiating our object with yung gagamitin natin yung new and then student. Yan. And then, i-echo na naman natin siya using our echo para ma-print out natin yung laman ng student natin. We will be calling or we will be echoing our object and then i-get na natin yung info. Yan. So, ano ba yung ginamit ko? Yan. Get info. Ayan. So, copy ko na lang yan and then i-paste ko dito. Ayan. And then, semicolon. But since wala pa naman akong nilalagay na value or wala akong nilalagay na value ng ating parameter, tignan nyo, wala namang katapat na value yung parameter natin, so wala pa rin akong may echo. So if I'm going to save this one, tignan nyo, wala pa rin siya ha. Wait lang, cancel. Control S and then Control S. Consider my everything. Unquote, sabi niya. So, wala pa akong pinapas. So, talagang wala pang laman yun. So, to do that, para magkaroon ng value, ito, yung ginamit natin, pwede mo naman yung gamitin ng set eh. Set name na lang kung gusto mo, pero construct na lang yung ginamit ko. Lagyan natin yan ng value. Ayan. So, lagyan natin inside million. So, Control S. Clearan natin. Okay. Ayan. Name ni Caramilia. Wait. Lagyan natin ng space. Dito. Ng space. Ayan. So, if I'm going to save that one and I'm going to run that one, ayan. Nakuha? Ganyan po dapat. Yung gaya ng ginawa nyo kanina, we can create this as a fruit, di ba? Fruit yan, and then yung property niya is $name din siya. And then yung ginamit nyo kanina is a function set name. So nag-set name ka din, naglagay ka din ng parameter niya. So we call this one a parameter. Ayan. So kung passing parameter po tayo, so kung ano yung parameter na pinasa niya papunta sa ating index, ayan. Pareho rin lang. So, katapat niyan. So, if we're going to add more properties ng ating student, yan. So, halimbawa is, kailangan ko ng age ng student natin. So, I'll be adding, magdagdag na lang ako dyan ng $age. Para mas madali na lang natin ma-call. So, dagdagan din natin dito. So, since nagdag tayo dyan, dagdagan na rin natin dyan. I-list din natin to. Lagyan din natin siya ng age. And then, pagdating dito, ayan, di ba naka-return name na tayo? Ayan, pwede na tayong mag-concatenate again dito. Concatenate tayo ng break muna para it will go to the next line. Break. And then, we will be concatenating it. Tapos, age. And then dot, and then this age. Copy lang natin yung this age natin. Control V. So, this age. So, pagdating na ng ating index, since naglagay na tayo ng dalawang parameter here, kailangan dalawa din yung parameter na nandito sa ating object. So, pwede lagyan natin yan na ang age niya is 29 and then Control S. And then, hindi siya nag-ano. Ito ba na-save? Control S. Control S. Yan. Nakuha? So, yan po yung classes and object natin. Kuha class, balik tayo sa code. Kung may question kayo regarding sa code natin. So first, I created a class. Gumawa ako ng sclass.php para makita natin that this is a class. So pagdating ng inheritance, gawa na lang tayo ulit ng another file, inheritance.php. Then i-call na lang natin ulit dito sa ating index. So, ang laman ng ating S-class is our class. So, I named that as a class student. And then, I created 2 properties. So, kahit na ilang properties na yan, dagdagan nyo na ng dagdagan. And then, i-pointer nyo siya. Always point it. So, kung anong laman ng parameter natin, passing parameter, kailangan meron din tayo pagdating ng ating object. So, in-instantiate natin siya. In-instantiate natin yung class natin using our E165742 na object. And then, inside the new student is yung laman po ng parameter natin. And then sa ating function, since we created our get and we use the return to return whatever value inside our parameter, and then ipo-call natin yung ating function na get. Pagdating dito, i-echo natin siya para ma-output natin yung laman ng ating get info. Nakuha? Class, question? Wala, may question?
Ma'am, wala na po.
Sure? How about may question kayo sa ating mga reporters? Or wala na kayong question? So, yung isa, hindi nag-report si Miss Vanessa Mendoza. So, hindi siya nakapag-report. Sayang naman yung points niya. Kasi, iba ba kasi yung isasubmit nyo sa akin dun sa Canvas, which is your PowerPoint presentation, which is 30 points. And then, while you're presenting na, nag-regradean ko na rin kayo. So, tinitignan ko kung sino yung makikijoin sa reporting. So, may grade din po kasi yun. Kaya kailangan mag-join, tumulong sa pag-explain sa mga classmates. So, pag wala na kayong question sa ating group 2, I think we will proceed now into our group 3. Group 3, ready na ba kayo? Stop presenting lang ako.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, group 3. Okay kayo na. Si Lordia, Sarmiento, Abalos, and Bala.
Kita na po ba? Good morning po.
Yes, kita na.
Okay. Nagkablakaw man ti maikatlong nga grupo, tinaimbag na bigat ti tumunggal maysa, nga awan labas na. Our group were composed of Mr. Edwin Balang. If you're here, can you please say oo? Edwin?
Nagpogi talaga ni Edwin.
Edwin, pakigalaw ang baso.
Calling
Buray.
the presence of Mr. Edwin Balang. Can you please say oo?
Buray kaawaran. Uwu.
The next one presenting is Mr. Emmanuel Loja. And yours truly. Can we just skip me? Let's move on to Miss Jillian Rose Abalos. And we are going to instill our research about the very useful and easy to use inheritance. Inheritance is one of the most important aspects of object-oriented programming, or OOP. The key to understanding an inheritance is that it provides code reusability. In place of writing the same code again and again, we can simply inherit the property of one class into the other. OOP is all about real-world object, and inheritance is a way of presenting real-world relationships. What is this inheritance? Let's dig deeper about it. Take it away, Jillian.
What is inheritance in object-oriented programming? Inheritance is
the procedure in which one class inherits the attributes and methods of another class. The class whose properties and methods are inherited is known as the parent class, and the class that inherits the properties from the parent class is the child class. In simple terms, inheritance in OOP is when a class derives from another class. The interesting thing is, along with the inherited properties and methods, a child class can have its own properties and methods. Okay. You may use the following syntax to implement inheritance in Python. So, we have created two child classes, namely BMW and OD, that have inherited the methods and properties of the parent class car. We have provided no additional features and methods in the class BMW, whereas there is one additional method inside the class OD. Notice how the instance method description of the parent class is accessible by the objects of child classes with the help of object 1 description and the object 2 description. And the separate method of class OD is also accessible using object 2 OD desk. Okay. As we can see in the screen po yung output. Next. Okay. We can check the base or parent class of any class using a built-in class attribute basis. As we can see here, the base class of both subclasses is car. Now let's see what happens when using base with the parent class car. So the one below, the last two part is the output when using the base with the base. Whenever we create a new class in Python 3.x, it is inherited from a built-in basic class called object. In other words, the object class is the root of all classes. Okay.
So let's move on to the forms of inheritance in object-oriented programming.
So there are broadly 5 forms of inheritance based on the involvement of parent and child classes. Number 1 is the single inheritance. This is a form of inheritance in which a class inherits only one parent class. This is the simple form of inheritance and hence also referred to as simple inheritance. Here, back by Warren. Here, the class child, wait. So here, the class child is inheriting only one class parent. Hence, this is an example of single inheritance. Next.
So second, we have multiple inheritance. An inheritance becomes multiple inheritances when a class inherits more than one parent class. The child class, after inheriting properties from various parent classes, has access to all of their objects. Next. Here we have one child class which is inheriting properties of three parent classes, parent 1, parent 2, and parent 3. All the classes have different functions, and all of the functions are called using the object of the child class. Next. In multiple inheritance, the child class first searches the method in its own class. If not found, then it searches in the parent classes that first and left to right order. Since this was an easy example with just two parent classes, we can clearly see that class parent 1 was inherited first, so the child class will search the method in parent 1 class before searching in class parent 2. Next. But for complicated inheritance problems, it gets tough to identify the order. So the actual way of doing this is called method resolution order in Python. We can find the MRO of any class using the attribute MRO. This tells that the child class first visited the class parent 1 and then parent 2, so the F1 method of parent 1 will be cleared. Here, the class child 1 is inheriting two classes, parent 1 and parent 2. The class child 2 is also inheriting two classes, parent 2 and parent 3. Another class child 3 is inheriting three classes, child 1, child 2, and parent 3. Next. Now, just by looking at this inheritance, it is quite hard to determine the method resolution order for class child 3. So here is the actual use of MRO. We can see that first, the interpreter searches child 3, then child 1, followed by parent 1, child 2, parent 2, and parent 3 respectively. Next.
So let's move on to the third multi-level inheritance. For example, a class 1 is inherited by a class 2 and this class 2 also gets inherited by the class 3. And this process goes on. This is known as multi-level inheritance. Let's understand with an example. So yung inheritance, di ba, pamana? So from one generation to the other, parang ganun lang po siya kapag sa real life. Here, the class child 1 is inheriting the parent class and the class child 2 is inheriting the class child 1. In this child 1 has access to function F1 and F2. Whereas child 2 has access to functions F1, F2, and F3. If we'll try to access the function F3 using the object of class 1, then an error will occur stating class 1 object has no attributes. So itong code na to, ina-explain lang na yung object 1 is pwede niyang i-inherit yung F1 and F2 pero hindi yung F3. While yung F2, i-inherit niya yung tatlo. So ito lang yung sinasabi niya. Has no attribute of F3. Yun yung error niya. So let's move on.
Next is hierarchical inheritance. In this, various child classes inherit a single parent class. The example given in the introduction of the inheritance is an example of hierarchical inheritance since classes BMW and Audi inherit class car. For simplicity, let's look at another example. Here, two child classes are inheriting the same parent class. The child class 1 has access to function F1 of parent class and function F2 of itself, whereas the class child 2 has access to function F1 of parent class and function F3 of itself.
So number 5 is the hybrid inheritance. When there is a combination of more than one form of inheritance, it is known as hybrid inheritance. It will be more clear after this example. In this example, two child classes, child 1 and child 2, are derived from base class parent using hierarchical inheritance. Another class, child 3, is derived from classes child 1 and child 2 using multiple inheritances. The class child 3 is now derived using hybrid inheritance. Next.
So now let us discuss about method overriding. The concept of overriding is very important in inheritance. Gives the special ability to the child or subclasses to provide a specific implementation to a method that is already present in their parent classes. Here, the function f1 of the child class has overridden the function f1 of the parent class. Whenever the object of child class will invoke f1, the function of child class gets executed. However, the object of the parent class can invoke the function f1 of the parent class. Next.
So let's move on to the super function. The super function in Python returns a proxy object that refers the parent class using the super keyword. This super keyword is basically useful in accessing the overridden method of the parent class. Jillian?
Okay. The official documentation of the super function cites two main uses of super function. First is in a class hierarchy with single inheritance, super helps to refer to the parent classes without naming them explicitly, thus making the code more maintainable. For example, next please. Here, with the help of super function f1, the f1 method of the super class of child class, parent class has been called without explicitly naming it. One thing to note here is that superclass can accept two parameters. First is the name of the subclass, and second is an object that is subclass. Let's see how. Next, please. The first parameter, the first parameter refers to the subclass child, while the second parameter refers to the object of child, which in this case is self. You can see the output after using super and super child self is the same because in Python 3, super child self is equivalent to to self. Next, please. What we have done here is that we call the init function of parent class using super init tapos child name. And as the init method of the parent class requires one argument, it has been passed as child name. So after creating the object of the child class, first the init function of child class got executed. Uh, and after that, init function of parent class. Next, please.
The second use case is to support cooperative multiple inheritances in a dynamic execution environment. Next. The super function call finds the next method in the MRO at each step, which is why first and second have to have it too. Otherwise, the execution stops at the end of first function init. Note that the superclass of both first and second is object. Let's find the MRO of third as well. Back pa Warren.
Ay, sorry po.
So the order is third, second, first, and the same is the order of all of our output. So next na. Next would be the
Wait, activity yung nakita ko. Stop muna doon. Later na ilahat yung mga activities ha, from group 2 to hanggang doon sa matatapos natin. I
Okay.
think yung na-report nyo is about Python. It's not about the object-oriented PHP. So if you're going to use that in PHP, yung mga div natin, def, init, mga ganyan, hindi natin yan magagamit sa PHP. Pero of course, meron din namang pagkakawig ng Python and PHP. Just that, yung mga words or mga keywords, mga access modifiers na ginagamit sa PHP is different from Python. Naintindihan niyo ba yung report niyo how those code works? Diba hindi? Naintindihan niyo? Have you tried Python?
No, ma'am, pero naghanap kami ng example sa PHP, whereas we know naman na hindi yun Python, pero may similarities sa mga
Yeah,
code.
there's similarities,
Yes.
pero kasi, pagdating kasi ng code natin, if we're going to, gagamitin natin yan, yung mga example ninyo, pagdating dun sa object-oriented programming ng PHP, mahihirapan. So can you show us some code how to do the inheritance in PHP before I'll be presenting something also? Gagamitin ko na lang yung report siguro ng 2D kasi yun yung tama na report ng inheritance.
Okay. So here are example. We get it from W3 School. You can consult that web page for clarification. So we learned in our previous discussion that about the class. So here our class is fruit, named fruit. So we have the property which is public, function, the method used, and the object which is yung strawberry natin. Gumamit din tayo ng pointers. So in here, wait, yung ipiprint ng code na to is, am I a fruit or a berry? Yung inherit ng ano natin is, yung inherit ng code natin is, the fruit is this pointers tas name, and the color is this tas yung one. Yung inherit nito is yung name which is strawberry, and then yung color niya. Ito, which is red yung value niya. So let's try na i-run ito. Ito po siya. Subukan natin. I am a fruit or a berry. The fruit is strawberry and the color is red. Which is hindi natin pwede nating hindi i-echo lahat pa to show lang na inherit lang siya. Strawberry yung fruit and the color is red.
Balik ka sa code. So, saan doon sa code ang ating parent class and saan dyan ang ating child class?
Ma'am?
In your own code, di ba dyan? Di ba sabi mo, kinuha mo yan sa W3 school.
Yes, ma'am.
Saan dyan yung parent class and saan dyan yung ating child class?
The parent class would be the
Yung fruit,
fruit,
ma'am.
if I'm not mistaken, and the other class is strawberry.
Okay, so what did we use in order to inherit whatever properties inside our parent class?
Public construct. Yeah.
Ano yung ginamit nating word para ma-inherit ng ating child class yung nandun sa ating parent class? Diba, agmana. Agmana di ay child class from our parent class. So what keyword did you use in order for the child class to inherit something from the parent class?
This one, ma'am, the highlighted part.
This name? No, it's not.
Okay.
Any member of the group?
Function construct, ma'am.
No. Any member of the group? Anyone from the class could help? Group 3?
Okay. Wait. Strawberry.
I will give extra 10 points sa makakasagot. Wala?
Ma'am,
Ma'am, di public.
Yes, Maureen?
yung message, ma'am.
No. Not?
Ma'am, di public.
No. Public is an access modifier.
Extend, ma'am.
Very good, Arlene. We need to use the word extends para ma-inherit natin kung ano yung nandun sa ating parent class. So, Arlene, you will get an extra 10 points for your... So, pagdating ng inheritance, gagamitin natin yung extends para magamit natin kung whatever properties are inside, kung ano yung mga properties na nandun sa ating parent class na gustong gamitin ng ating child class, kailangan natin extend yun para magamit natin. Kasi kung hindi natin gagamitin yung extend natin, hindi mo yan magagamit. Kulang nga kayo sa report kasi kailangan meron din sana, i-present nyo din sana yung ating mga modifier, access modifiers, ganon. para mas maintindihan yung inheritance. Kasi pagdating kasi ng inheritance natin, same true with encapsulation may access modifier, dapat ma-enhance din ng encapsulation yung pagdating ng ating access modifier. Yung access modifier natin is yung public, yung protected, and yun din yung private. So pagdating ng access modifier natin, since naka-public siya, and though in-extend natin siya, pwede siyang i-inherit kasi naka-public siya. Pero sometimes, kahit na naka-inherit siya, pag may mga ginamit ka na word na access modifier like private or the protected, nagkakaroon ng issues. So meron at meron ka ulit gagamitin ng mga keywords in order for you para magamit mo yung mga properties na nandun sa ating parent class. Sana yan, dinivide nyo din sana. Kasi, halimbawa, yung ating class fruit hanggang sa ating function na intro, that should be our index. And then yung class strawberry hanggang dun sa close bracket niya, that should be our inheritance. And then from the strawberry hanggang dun sa intro, that should be our index. Yan. Dapat ganyan. You try na, show us, pag-iwahiwalayin mo nga yan, tignan mo, parehong-pareho din yung output. Gawa ka muna ng index. Yan. Copy mo una yung nasa taas. Index.php. Meron ka na. Override na lang yan. Copy mo yan. Hanggang dyan sa ating, sige pa. Yan, hanggang dyan. Copy mo, paste mo doon. Then close the PHP. Save mo. Then open again. Yan, copy mo yung class. Ay, hindi dapat siya index. Hindi index yan. Ang index natin dito sa may strawberry. Ano yan dapat? Class yan. I-delete mo muna yung laman niya. Delete mo muna. Balik ka sa code mo. Yung strawberry pababa. Doon sa pinakababa. Yung object. Sa object yan. Yan dapat. Yan. Copy mo yan. Paste mo sa index. Save mo. Then, gawa ka ng class. Fruit class. Copy mo muna yung fruit class natin. Fruit. O, class na lang. Class.php. Class.php. Copy mo yan. Fruit, class fruit natin. Hanggang dun sa close bracket. Sige. Sige pa. Sige pa.
Wait lang, ma'am.
Nakabahan ka ba?
Nilalamig.
Yan. Sige. Yan. Copy mo yan. Paste mo dun sa class natin, class.php. Yan. And then, save mo. Then, go back to your code. Copy mo yung class strawberry. Make that our inheritance.php. Open ka muna ng PHP dun. Open PHP, then close PHP. And then close PHP. Then go back to your index. You need to include. Include mo ngayon. Yan. Include once. Yan. Include mo si Include once. Underscore once. Include mo si class.php tsaka si inheritance.php. Open and close. Open and close, parentheses, then say, quote, a single quote. Single quote muna. Single quote. Single quote. Yan. Yan. PHP. And then single quote, and then close, and then semicolon. And then inheritance.php. Semicolon. Then save it and then run it. Diba? It's just the same. Pero, madidistinguish mo ngayon Pag nagdagdag ka halimbawa kay inheritance, halimbawa maraming dun sa class mo, you have a lot of properties, and then gusto mong gamitin sa inheritance, gusto mo siyang gamitin, at least naka-ready na siya, and then call mo na lang siya sa index. Mas madali kasing ganyan nakasepa-separate kaysa yung buo, dun sa buo, paano mo malalaman kung saan doon yung inheritance mo. O diba? Pag ganyan kasi, much better na nakahiwa-hiwalay siya para mas madali mo siyang i-call, mas madali kang magdagdag ng mga properties, mas madali siyang mag-inherit, mga ganon. So, dapat ganyan din sa pagdating sa encapsulation. Nakaganyan dapat. Ganyan kasi yung gusto ko, doon kasi sa W3 school, they put it in a single file, di ba? So, sana pagdating ng activity ninyo, yung mga isasabit yung activity, sana nakaganyan, nakaseparate si index, nakaseparate yung class natin, and then if we want to inherit that class, nakaseparate din siya, mas maayos, mas malinis. Halimbawa, if you're creating a very big project, okay, dagdag tayo ng properties. Sige, ako na ang bahala kay class. Sige. Pero pagdating ng inheritance, ako na lang magdadagdag. Kasi pag ganun, magudwa-gudwa yung mabinsa-binsa yung di trabaho ang inukasta, na nakakasta, that is object-oriented. Ganyan at ganyan dapat yung ayos ng object-oriented programming natin. Nakasepa-separate siya. Hindi siya nasa isang file. Kasi pag too much big project na yung ginagawa ninyo, and then nasa index lang siya, tapos hindi ka pa magaling maglagay ng mga comments, that this certain line of code is para dito sa part ng system mo, hindi mo nilagyan yun ng comment, and then you're going to edit something, sasabihin sa ni client mo, I want to change this part of the system. Sa pulong to, pero GMT file na dahil may isang file tayo na sa pulong. Pero pag naka-separate yan in a file, alam mo agad, alam ko itong part ng system na to is, makikita mo na agad dun sa nga to, diba, dito browser, nandun siya sa ganitong dun ko na siya i-edit. Alam ko na yan, kung nasa ang line niya. Kung baga ganon. May question kayo sa kanila?
Yan, ma'am.
Walang question? Sige, paki-close mo muna yung i-present ko nga ito kasi yung tama na report ng Actually, this is the report of group 3 in 2B. Mga agagayang kayumot lang, di ba? I-present ko na rin siya. Kasi ayaw ko yung present nila na Python. Nakikita? Visible ba siya?
Yes, ma'am.
Diba? Yan, kay Miss Galvante ito, sa kanila ito. So, hiramin na natin. Kasi ito kasi talaga yung all about inheritance. Anak, kala ko ba mag-basketball tayo ng tropa mo? Nagsusumba ko na, wala namang pumapayat. Ay, grabe. Nakakatawa. Okay, so we have this access modifiers. We're dealing with public, private, and protected. Yan. So, siyempre, alam naman natin, public, para sa publiko, private property, protected, so pinoprotektahan niya. So we have this public access modifier. So the public access modifier allows code to access the class, method, and attributes from both side and outside the class. So the property or method is accessible from any location. So this is the default state. So accessible daw siya. So externally accessible. And then, ito yung code niya. So, nag-create din siya ng class. So, pareho din kayo yan. Yan din yung ginamit niya, Ginamit din niya na nasa isang single file siya. So, nag-create din siya ng class and then ginamit niya yung access modifier na public para magamit niya yung mga properties ng ating class. So, kahit na gamitin na niya ng paulit-ulit sa other files and everything, as long as naka-public siya, pwede siyang magamit. So we also had the private access modifier. So when we define private properties, we define properties and methods in our classes with the private access modifier, we can restrict others from accessing them. So the property or method is accessible both within the class and by classes that derive from it. So private siya. So sabi niya doon, only internally accessible. Tapos, only internally accessible lang yan. So, tignan nyo, ginamit na niya ng private. Nagka-error na siya. Kasi naka-private na siya eh. So, hindi na niya siya na-access. Sabi niya, we try to access a private property from outside the class. Ginamit na niya kasi outside the class. It should be inside the class lang siya para magamit niya. So, how to access a private property? So, we've seen that we can access private properties from outside the class, but we still need to set and obtain the values of the properties. We use public methods to communicate with private properties because they can interact with code outside of the class scope as well as code inside the class. So the public methods that can communicate in this way are usually classified as one of two types. We have the setter and the getter. So setters for modifying the values of private properties, and getters, the values of the private properties are retrieved using getters. So yun yung ginamit natin kanina, pero gumamit muna ako ng construct. Pero if we're going to access our private property, gamitan natin na setters and getters to access whatever properties inside our private access modifier. Yan. So halimbawa yan, o, tignan nyo. Yung class na car, tapos naka-private yung property niya, and then nag-set muna siya. Sinet niya yung model natin, and then ginet niya. Pagka-set and get niya, even though this is in private, pwede na niyang ma-access kasi ginamitan niya ng setter and then the getter. So every time you use the setter and the getter, at dati pang malubos na mausar mo yung private. So doon pumapasok yung encapsulation. Di ba? Naka-advance ako doon. Sino yung encapsulation sa inyo? Gamitin nyo din yung setter and getter. So, nagagamit natin, nagiging public yung ating private using our setter and getter. So, we also have the protected access modifier. So, the protected permits code to be used within the and outside of the class. Wait, may papasok. Sino yun? Halaman class. Sino yun? Sino yung halaman plant? And so, only members of the class have access to the property or method. So, sabi niya, di ba, kung sino yung mga member ng class, ang may access lang sa property and method. So, protected siya. It permits the code to be used within and outside of the class, but only members of the class have access to the property of method. So, ibig sabihin to, internally lang siya. Internally accessible and pwede siyang i-inherit ng ating child. So, eto naman na siya. So, internally lang yan ha. Pagdating ng public natin, externally accessible. Pagdating ng ating protected, internally din siya. And then pagdating ng ating private, internally lang din siya. Pero hindi siya pwedeng i-inherit ng ating child class. So, yun yung pagkakaiba ha. Yung public, externally accessible, it can access any part of the code as long as it is in public. Pagdating ng ating protected, it is internally accessible and pwede siyang ma-inherit ng ating mga child classes. Pagdating naman ng private class natin, ay private access modifier natin, it is only internally accessible pag ginamitan natin siya ng setter and getter, pero hindi siya pwedeng i-inherit ng ating child class. Nakuha? So, ito yung parent class natin, yung car. Gumamit siya ng setter. And then, in-extend, ito, nagkaroon na ng inheritance. Use the word extend para ma-extend niya yung mga properties ng ating parent class, which is our protected model. Protected siya. So, wala siyang problem na gamitin yung mga properties ng ating parent class kasi ginamitan din siya ng setter. And then, di ba sabi ko kanina, pagdating ng ating protected, it is internally accessible and can inherit by the child class. Okay, so yun, pwede siyang gamitin. Pero pagdating ng private class, ay ng private access modifier, though ginamitan mo siya ng setter and getter, dun lang siya sa sariling class na pwedeng gamitin yung ating property, pero hindi siya pwede i-inherit ng ating child. Nakuha? Nakuha yung pagkakaiba ng ating public, protected, saka private. Ayan. So why do we need access modifiers? To limit the alteration that code from outside the classes can make to the classes methods and properties. So it requires access modifiers. Only methods from within the class are allowed to access a property or function that has been marked as private. So as a result, we must provide public methods in order to communicate with private methods and properties. So we can place logic inside these methods to validate and restrict data that arrives from outside the class. Para magkaroon doon ng limitation yung paggamit natin ng mga codes natin outside the classes. So inheritance in object-oriented programming in PHP is the ability to eliminate code duplication with inheritance is one of the key advantages of object-oriented programming. So when a programmer writes the same code more than once, code duplication happens, which is a problem that inheritance aims to remedy. So hindi na magkakaroon ng redundancy kasi pag ginamit mo na yung code more than once, sasabihin na agad sa'yo na nagamit mo na siya. So we have a parent class with its methods and properties as well as a child class or classes that can utilize the parent's code. So we can construct a reusable piece of code by using inheritance, which we can write only once in the parent class and reuse as much as we need in the child classes. So pag ginamit natin po yung inheritance natin and we extend, ginamit natin yung word na extend, lahat ng mga properties na nandun sa ating parent class ay pwedeng manahin ng ating child class as long as you choose the right access modifier. And then, malilimit din niya yung paggamit mo ng code ng paulit-ulit. Halimbawa, ginamit mo na yung property na name dun sa ating class na student, and then, gumawa ka ulit ng another file and gusto mo ulit gamitin yung name na yun, which is wrong. Pwede mo naman na lang siyang i-inherit para minsanan na lang yung gamit mo dun sa name. Halimbawa kasi dun sa database, if you're going to connect your object-oriented programming na inheritance na natin sa database natin. Siyempre dun sa database natin, isa lang yung table natin ng student. Isa lang, di ba? So if we're going to call the name of the student from our database, we could use na lang yung class student natin. Kasi nandun na yung name. Yun na lang yung gamitin natin to call every time the name of the student in the database. So, hindi mo na paulit-ulit na kinocode dun sa mga code mo na, gagamitin ko yung name na to dito sa aking homepage. Yan. Kung gusto kong ilabas yung mga list of student dito. Pagdating na naman ng reports, gusto mo ilabas ulit yung pangalan ng student dito sa reports. So, ulitin mo na naman na gagamitin yung pangalan ng student. Pero pag ginamit mo, nag-inherit ka na lang, i-inherit mo na lang siya, gawa ka na lang ng another file, and then inherit mo na lang, idagdag mo na lang dun sa index na yung function na ginamit mo dun sa isang panibagong file. Hindi mo na kailangan ulit-ulitin na ginagamit yung name kasi isang beses mo na lang siya i-call. I-copy mo na lang yung function mo, yung method mo, ilagay mo na lang siya sa index, and then magagamit mo na yung mga properties mo. So, ganyan yung kagandahan ng inheritance. So, sa halip na yung system mo is napakalaki, napakaraming file. Kasi pag marami din kasing file yan, naglo-loading din yan pagdating ng domain ninyo. Diba dati limit na, nung mga MB lang dapat ituusarin nyo, nung lang yung capacity na lang yung mga domain ninyo. May mga limitation kasi yun eh. Pag mabigat na kasi yung mga file na nandun sa domain ninyo, pag nag-load na kayo online, mabagal na rin yung ikot niya. Pero pag nalilimit nyo, ginamitan nyo siya ng object-oriented programming, napakontain nyo yung mga files, yung code ninyo na paliit nyo lang, mas mabilis din yung pag-ikot ng mga system ninyo sa online. So, dito, continue. How can a class inherit the code of another class? Yan. So, di ba sabi ko, we will be using the extends keyword. So, inheritance allow us to write the code only once in the parent and then use the code in both the parent and the child classes. So, to declare that one class inherits the code from another class, we use the extends keyword. So, the non-private methods and attributes that the parent class inherits are available to the child class. This allows us to write the code once in the parent class and reuse it in both the parent and the child class. Pero nagagamit lang natin yan pagdating ng ating public and protected, nung mag-extend tayo. Hindi natin pwedeng gamitin si private kahit na mag-setter and getter tayo. Kasi nga, di ba sabi ko kanina, yung private natin is internally accessible lang siya. And then it cannot inherit anything from our parent class. Pero pagdating ng ating protected, pwede siyang mag-inherit, though it is also internally accessible. Ayan. So, pagdating dito, sa code na to, so yung class parent natin, so kung ano yung pinaka-main na class natin, and then if we use the word extend, whatever the code or the properties inside our parent class, pwedeng manahin ng ating child class. So, this is the code. Hindi niya kasi pinaghiwalay. Magpapakita na lang ulit ako later ng code regarding the student. Yan. So, ginamitan niya ulit, naka-private siya, and then naka-public siya. And then, in-extend niya, so no code in the child classes, sabi niya. So, the child class inherits the code from the parent class. So, gumawa siya ng object, in-instantiate din niya yan. And then, nag-set siya ng value ng ating sports car. Yan. So, yung set model natin, so yun yung function niya doon. So, nilagyan niya ng parameter. So, kung ano yung magiging value niya, ito na rin yung value niya. So, passing parameter tayo. The dollar model pass the value here. So, yan yung magiging value natin. So, yan na rin yung i-output niya. Okay, next. How can a child class have its own methods and properties? So, a child class can use the properties and methods of its parent class, and it can also have its own properties and methods. So while a child class can utilize the code it inherited from its parent, the parent class cannot use the code of the child class. Yeah. Sabi niya, when a child class can utilize the code it inherited from its parent, the parent class cannot use the code of the child class. So, magagamit pa rin niya kung ano yung na-inherit niya at kung ano yung parent class, yung code niya, hindi na niya magagamit pag nilagyan na niya siya ng sarili niyang value or nilagyan na niya yung properties niya is may sarili na rin value. Kumbaga is matatakpan kung ano yung latest na nandun sa child, di ba yung parent class natin, halimbawa may value na siya. Yung property niya may value. Kapag dating ng child class, gusto natin siyang extend, pero nilagyan na natin siya ng sarili niyang value. So, matatakpan ngayon yung value ng parent natin. So, kung ano yung magiging value na ng child, yun na yung i-utilize na, yun na yung ilalabas niya. And then, how to override the parent's properties and methods in the child class. So, the child class can override the parent's class properties and methods in the same way that it can have its own properties and methods. Yan yung sinasabi ko. Pwede natin siyang i-override. Na kahit na may sarili ng property yung parent natin, pwede pa rin natin lagyan ng sarili pa rin value yung ating child class. So, rewrite a method or property that already exists in the parent but with a different value or code. So, i-write mo na lang yung property na yon dun sa ating child class and then lagyan mo na lang siya ng sariling value para matakpan mo yung dating value na nandun kay ating parent class. So, halimbawa ito. Ayan. So, i-return daw niya dapat si bit. Return yung bit natin sa ating parent class. Tapos in-extend niya, sabi niya, pero nilagyan niya ng value na room. So, sa halip na ang i-return na output is bit, since nilagyan naman na niya ng value yung ating child class, so, nagkaroon yan ng extension, kaya tinakpan niya kung ano yung ginamit na ng ating child class na property and the value, yun na lang yung i-output niya. So, parang tinakaban niya. So, how to prevent the child class from overriding the parent's method? Yan. So, meron din tayong keyword na gagamitin para hindi ma-override ng ating anak yung ating mga magulang, ang ating parent class. So, to prevent the child class method from overriding the parent's method, we can prefix the parent's method with a final keyword. So, lagyan natin ng word na final para kahit na maglagay na si child ng another value, hindi niya siya ma-override kasi sabi niya, final na to. So, eto na talaga, final na. Hindi mo siya pwedeng i-override. So, to do that, dagdag na lang tayo dito ng final. Yan. Pero bakit sabi niya dito? Cannot override final method car sound. sabi niya. The parent class has method that returns bit. Yan, so re-return niya. Pero ginamitan niya ng final. The child class has some method that return groom. And then nag-create siya ng object. And then in-instantiate niya yung ating class. And then i-get niya yung result to the method. Pero nagkaroon siya ng, kasi hindi naman kasi siya naglagay kasi ng mga parameter, like properties. Dapat kasi may properties dito. Dapat dun sa properties, yung properties dapat yung naka-final. Diba? Kaso wala, hindi siya naglagay. Okay, wala na, hanggang dun lang. It's time to peace time na. So, naintindihan nyo yung paggamit ng ating, yung public natin, ulitin ko, ang public natin, it is externally accessible. So, internally, externally, pwede siyang ma-access. Pagdating ng ating protected, it is internally accessible and then pwede siyang ma-inherit ng ating mga child classes. Pagdating ng ating private na access modifier natin, it is only inherited, it is only internally accessible, pero hindi pwedeng magmana or hindi pwedeng i-inherit ng mga child class natin. Kailangan gagamitan natin din ng only internally accessible and hindi pwedeng, not inherited by our child class. Ganun. So, yung meron din tayong keyword na final, we have the keyword extends, we have the keyword setter and getter. So, yun yung mga natin pagdating ng inheritance. Public access modifier, private access modifier, protected access modifier, the keyword extends, the keyword final, and ano yung kulang ko? The setter and then the getter. So, parang meron din siyang pagkakapareha sa ating encapsulation. Paggamit din ng setter and getter, and then paggamit din ng private access modifier, public, and then protected. So, meron din siyang, kagaya din siya ng encapsulation, may pagkakahawig. Pero, merong part dun sa encapsulation na naiiba pagdating sa inheritance. Nakuha? Naintindihan, class?
Ma'am.
So, gawa ba tayo ulit ng code? Wait lang. Gawa tayo ng code. Mag-inherit naman tayo. So, gawa ako ng new file. Save ko siya as inheritance.php. Kasi nilalagay ng experiment. Ano yan? So, pagdating ng ating inheritance, gawa muna tayo ng sarili nating class. And then extend natin si ating student class. So, anong pwedeng ma-inherit? Ma-inherit ng ating class. Sa ating mga student. Department. Yan. Kunwari, meron akong child class that certain student kung mag-inherit something from my student class. So, ano yung gusto kong kunin sa kanila? Yung name, pwede rin. Pero pwede ka rin mag-create dito ng sarili niyang property. Kung gusto mo mag-create ng sariling property din ng ating class na department, ng ating child class. Ano ba yung nasa department natin? Public, ang class kasi is, class na lang, class department. College of Arts and Sciences. So, yung class natin, lagyan na natin siya ng value. Ang class kasi is Red Dragon eh. Red Dragon. Red Dragon tayong mga College of Arts and Sciences. We are Red Dragon. Then, gawa tayo ng function. So, department. So we want to return. Return natin. Kuha muna tayo kay student class natin. I-return na natin yung name. Try natin na i-return yung name. So i-return natin. I-inherit natin yung name from our student class. So i-copy ko yung this name. Copy ko yan. Control C. So i-inherit ko na. So, kung ano yung nandito kay student class, may inherit na ng ating department, yung ating child class. So, ang child class natin is yung department, and then ang ating parent class is the student. So, from the department, kinuha na natin yung name natin. Ayan. So, ano ba yung name natin kanina dito, yung value niya? So, si Haramilia is pwede tayo maglagay ng screen College of Arts and Sciences. Pass na lang. Pass. Team. And so, pagdating ng ating index, yan, sa index natin, idadagdag na natin dito yung ating inheritance.php. And then, echo natin. Ang ginamit natin dito, with department. Tapos, tingnan natin i-run. Tingnan ko muna kung may error. Try ko muna. Hanapin ko may error. Ano ba kanina yun? So, error, undefined method, get department. Sa main daw siya, 2A in line 14. So, may error tayo sa line 14. Ayan. Sa ating index ba yung line 14 natin? Kasi na missing daw yan. Ayan. So, pwede na natin itong palitan. Instantiate natin. Kasi kanina, in-instantiate natin yung class natin from student. But since mag-i-inherit na tayo, i-call na lang natin yung ating class. Dapat malaki. Palitan natin yan ng class. And then, copy ko yan, paste ko dito. Let's try again. Unquote, class not found. Ayaw. Bakit hindi ko ma-call? Extend natin. Balik tayo dito sa inheritance. So, in-echo ko siya. Ginamit ko yung ating object. And then, in-echo ko din yung ating student para makuha natin yung get department na value niya. And then, pinol natin yung ating S-class na .php. And then, extend natin yung ating department. Kaya pala. Dapat pala department yun. Hindi pala sa class. Undefined property, department task. Online 16, from task team, pwede na siya. Pero online 16, may error ako sa inheritance 16. 16 daw. Inheritance dito. Yung task. Dapat naka-capital. Okay. Yan. So, wala tayo. Hindi tayo naglagay ng space. Lagyan muna natin ng space. This name, Maramilya, is from task team. And then, dagdag na tayo dito ng break. Echo. Break. Yan. So, si Haramilia is from task team Red Dragon. Red Dragon is Itan tayo ng additional dito ng space. Yan. Nakuha? Ulitin natin yung code para mas maintindihan. So, di ba ito yung kanina natin? Ito lang kanina yung class and object natin. So, first, nag-create tayo ng class dyan. So, may mga properties na siya dyan. Nagkaroon na rin tayo ng ating parameter. Naglagay na rin tayo ng mga pinointer na natin that this name is para kayo variable age, name and age. And then, we want to return yung function o return natin kung ano yung magiging value niya. And then, we will be calling that. We created an object, E165742. So, student yan. Student ID number yan. Siya yung object natin. Instantiate natin siya kanina gamit ang new. Pero new kanina is ginamit natin yung student. Kanina, student yan. But since nag-inheritance na tayo, gumawa tayo ng sariling class natin. Ito na yung ating child class. In-extend natin yung ating parent class. And then we could create our own properties. Yan, pwede na tayong mag-create ng properties natin. Pwede na rin tayong maglagay ng value ng properties natin. We can create our own function. Karoon tayo ng function. So, hiniram natin yung name coming from our student class. Yan. So, in-inherit na natin, hiniram natin. So, kahit nahiramin din natin si age. So, kahit na lahat ng properties ng ating parent class is gagamitin ng ating child class, pwede. Pwede. Gamitin mo lahat yan. I-call mo lahat. Pwede. And then, gumawa ako ng function para ma-return ko yung hiniram kong property sa aking parent class. And then, yung ginawa ko na sarili kong property. And then, pagdating ng aking index, ayan. So, in-include ko din sa inheritance ko dyan. In-include ko din sa S-class ko dyan. Tapos, pinalitan ko na yung aking, yung instantiation ng aking object, pinalitan ko siya ng department para ma-distinguish ko that this is coming from the child class. Ayan. And then, so, hiniram ko na yung value. Ayan yung value niya. Dito, pagdating ng get department, hiniram ko na yung value na name, and then, kung ano na yung dinugtong ko dito. So, ito na yung i-return niya. So, pag run ko, ito na yung output. Nakuha? Magulo or nakuha? Yeah, violent reaction. You need to tell me if you understand the code or not. Anyway, I'll be sending you the source code naman. I will be, i-compress ko siya and then send ko sa inyo. Then pag-aralan ninyo para dun sa ating next reporter, kindly use this code na lang. Pwede gamitin nyo siya. And then, pagdating ng encapsulation, I want you to use how to use the protected and then the private. And then, kung paano ba nagkakaroon ng hiding dun sa encapsulation natin. So, we through with our abstraction and polymorphism. Already na ba yung encapsulation natin today? Para mag-report na rin yung ating encapsulation. Encapsulation. Ready ba kayo? Sino yung encapsulation? What group?
Kami ma'am.
Naka-ready kayo? Naka-ready kayo? You want to report today? Or you want to report na lang next week? Last na kasi, last reporting na natin next week kasi you will be having your final exam on the last week of January. Kasi nag-wrong pala ako, wala mo lang nag-correct sa akin doon sa pinost ko na 1, 2, 3 reporters. Dapat, nung naka-report na pala yung 1, 2, 3, 4 na sana, wala mo lang nag-react doon. I-like nyo lang. Okay na? Or you want to report now para matapos na kayo? Para dalawang reporter na lang next week. Kasi pag maaga rin tayo matataas na klase, pa rin kayo kay Ma'am Nali. Ano? May question pa nga pala pagdating ng ating inheritance. Did you understand inheritance? Agmana lang, Daddy, agmana. Naintindihan? Pag walang question, kindly group 2, could you please share the activity para makita ng classmates nyo at paki-explain kung ano yung activity ninyo. Group 2, paki-present ng activity.
Ma'am, madali lang yung activity. Saglit lang po, mag-online lang po ako. Gagawa lang po kayo ng essay kung essay po kasi yung pinakakuha namin. Dapat po ba na codes?
Yes, it should be code. It should be machine activity. Para
Okay
ma-enhance
po,
nila
ma'am.
yung... Pwede rin kayo maglagay ng quiz muna. For example, is 1 to 10 na multiple choice. And then, pwede kayong magbigay ng, ng machine activity. Kasi alam nyo, if you created a lot of activities, halimbawa is 50 points yung ginawa nyo activity, all the reporters are exempted, automatic na perfect nila. So, ganun kasi yun. So, kailangan, if you're going to send me the quiz and the machine activity, kailangan, halimbawa yung quiz, lagay nyo na rin yung answer key doon, and then ako na lang bahala maglagay sa canvas. Tapos, pati na rin doon sa machine activity, gawa kayo, and then i-enhance ko na lang pag halimbawa is hindi ko nagustuhan yung ginawa nyo, ako na lang din yung, ayusin ko na lang before I post it in canvas.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, since uulitin po namin yung presentation na i-upload sa Canvas for clarification, gagawa na rin po kami ng ibang activity since madali lang po naman yung ginawa namin.
Yes, if possible. Mas
Okay
maganda
po,
kung
ma'am.
gumawa na lang kayo ng quiz and then quiz kahit 1 to 10 na multiple choice and then machine activity. Mas maganda yung ganun kasi kayo din naman yung maging advantage din sa part niyo na reporter. Pag mas marami kayong pinagawa sa kanila, mas marami yung scores niyo, di ba?
Okay, ma'am. Send na lang po namin sa'yo and pag
Yes.
na-approvean, kami na lang po mag-explain sa group chat.
Oh, sige, sige. How about
Okay,
the
ma'am.
group 2? Group 2, okay na yung pa-activity nyo?
Hanggaran.
Paki-present. Kahit basahin lang.
So ate guys,
Ayan,
in part 1, multiple choice or pagpili kayo ta answer diyan nga tapos lagi kamot lang di elementary ka siya eh. So the part 2 mi is machine activity. Write an object-oriented program using COVID-19 as a class. Create at least 3 properties and some methods or functions and create an object to be instantiated.
Halimbawa, ganyan siya, Warren. So, naggumawa sila muna ng activity na multiple choice and then machine activity. So, ako nang bahalang magbibigay ng points kung ilang points yung machine activity na yan.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. So, do you have any further question regarding object and classes and so with inheritance? May question ba kayo regarding sa codes and explanation? Walang question, walang further clarification.
Wala na, ma'am. Clear
Sino
na.
yung halaman plant? Sino tong halaman plant?
Ma'am, mag-report kami latan, ma'am.
Ay, report kay Lata. Naka-ready kayo. Okay, if you're ready, the floor is yours. Hindi ko rin alam si Halaman Club, that's why I'm asking. Kasi mag-attendance ako, tapos hindi ko alam kung sino si Halaman Club.
Ma'am, sorry ma'am, siya kata.
Sino ka?
Ryzen ma'am.
Ryzen Tan. Pa-click na ng read view dito sa baba ng PowerPoint nyo para mag-zoom. Read view. Hindi yan, isa. Ay, pwede rin pala yun. Pero maganda rin kasi read view. Sige, ganyan. Dapat naka-full screen.
Aman.
So, good morning, Mom. Good morning, classmates. We are the Group 4, consisting of 4 members. Our leader, Christian Joe Corpus.
Hey, good morning.
CJ.
Oh, good morning, everyone. Our member is Maureen U.S. Michelle L. Keaton, Arlene P. Padilla.
Next. This is the content of our report. First, we will explain what is encapsulation. Second, we will provide informations about its advantages and disadvantages. Third, we will give examples. And last, we will give the summarization of our report or the conclusion.
So before we proceed, any idea about encapsulation?
For me, para siya yung tinetake natin na gamot, yung antibiotic. Example niya is yung amoxicillin. Now, let's define what is encapsulation. Next slide. So, encapsulation is one of the 4 fundamental OOP concepts and is also known as data hiding. It is the process in which you wrap up functions and members in a single unit. It is the mechanism that binds together code and the data it manipulates. So, yung encapsulation is also known as data hiding. So, para siyang protective shield, kumbaga. Siya yung nagpre-prevent na ma-access yung data outside the shield gamit ang code. So, next, where is encapsulation used? Encapsulation helps us to bind data, instance variables, and member functions, which work with the instance variables into a class. Kagaya nga ng sinabi ni Maureen, ang encapsulation ay para siyang protective shield. Kaya ang encapsulation ay napaka-importante na in terms of hiding data of a class from illegal direct access.
So here are the advantages of encapsulation: data hiding and abstraction. Unnecessary details, internal representation, and implementation are hidden from the end users for protection of data structure and the class. Data access is prohibited from members of other classes by creating private methods. It protects the internal state of any object by keeping member variables private and preventing any inconsistent state. It is the enclosing of data and related operation into that object. Note that encapsulation is used to hide internal views from the client. Next is the data security. Encapsulation helps in making data very robust and secured, as the data and member functions are wrapped together to form an object. All the tasks are done inside without any external worry, and it also makes life very easy. Next is the reliability. There are instances you don't have to rewrite same functionality and that you inherited from the parent class. Next is the easier testing of code. Encapsulated PHP code is easy to test as the function used for testing child class ensures the testing of parent class functions also. Last is the increased flexibility. Class variables can be accessed by get or set methods, increasing flexibility. It is easy to maintain as the internal implementation can be changed without changing the code.
And this is the disadvantage of encapsulation. Code size. The length of the code increases drastically in the case of encapsulation. We need to provide all the methods with the specifier. More instruction. As the size of the code increases, therefore, you need to provide additional instructions for every method. And last, increased code execution. Encapsulation results in the increase in the duration of program execution. It is because more instructions are added to the code, therefore they require more time to execute.
Now let's proceed to the class encapsulation with access modifiers. We have the first access modifier, which is the public. It means that it can only be accessed from within the class that defines it. Next slide. So how to use the public access modifier? The public access modifier cannot be used on the class itself and must instead be used on its attributes or methods. So in order for us to state that a member is public, we simply write the keyword public in front of the member's definition statement. Just like from the image below, we need to state the class, then the class name, and state the public access modifier, and next to it is the variable. This is the example of public access modifier. As you can see from the image, the example code followed the syntax. First, we state the class, then the class name, which is the car, and we write the keyword public in front of the member's definition statement, which is the public and the variable top speed. Michelle will going to run the code. So ayan, kita dun sa screen ni Michelle na na-print natin yung result by accessing the top speed attribute directly through the object. Na-access natin yon kasi na-access natin directly yung top speed na variable since naka-public siya. Next.
Now, let's move on to the second access modifier, which is the private. Private no access restriction can be accessed from anywhere, even from outside of the class scope. So, how to use the access modifier? When we specify that a member should be private, it means that it can only be used inside the class. It will not be available to use through the object. Unlike in public modifier, private will not be able or available to use through the object. The image below shows the syntax upon using the private access modifier. We need to write the class and the class name. Next, state the private keyword and the variable name. And this is our example for private access modifier. Of course, we have followed the syntax. State the keyword private and the variable name. And this will be the result of the code of example 2. In the example, we are allowed to use the top speed variable attribute inside the class in a method like drive, because the drive in public is public. We can access it through the object instance.
So this is the example 3. It is also an example of using private access modifier. So as you can see, from the echo part, hindi kagaya ng example 2 na in-explain ni Michelle, dito, dinirect natin na in-access yung top speed. Michelle, run mo the code. So there's an error. Merong error kasi kagaya nga yung sinabi ni Michelle kanina, private access modifier can only be accessed from within the class that define it. So dito sa example 3, we directly access the private attribute. That's why there's an error.
So next, we have the protected access modifier, which means can only be accessed from within the class that defines it, as well as any child class. So how to use the protected access modifier? The member will be available to any child class that inherits from this class. So this access modifier is just like the private modifier. The only difference is that the member will be available to any child class that inherits from this class. The image shows the syntax of using protected access modifier. Just like from the syntax of the two modifiers, we have to state the class. Next is the class name, then the protected keyword, and the variable name. So this is the example. We have a class, then the class name, and of course the protected keyword. From this example, our parent class has both its members marked as protected. So Michelle will run the code. Similar to the private modifier, when we try to access the protected members, the result is error.
As you can see in the example 4, the result is error because we tried to access the protected member. In this case, ma-access natin yung protected parent class sa loob ng child class. From the example, our child display method uses the protected method from the parent class. Madam, pakiran lang. As you can see from the result, the child display method can print the text because it has the public access modifier applied. Encapsulation. Can be used if the properties of the object are private and updating them through public methods. Encapsulation in PHP can achieve using the implementation of access specifiers. It is very careful about OOPS concept. Inheritance many times inheritance can undermine the concept of encapsulation.
Object-oriented programming in PHP is achieved by using the concept of encapsulation, which is used for information hiding. It reduces the easy accessibility of attributes of the present class. Getter and setter methods are used for avoiding external unwanted access. It also helps in validating new values assigned to the properties.
Pwede gumawa kayo ng code to show. Magpakita kayo ng code how the access modifiers been used. Yung yung kayo mismo yung magde-demo. Kahit na yung yung nandyan na na-code ninyo, palitan nyo na lang yung mga access modifier. I think I'll be choosing example number 4. Can you go to example number 4? So, example number 4 is protected access modifier siya. Can you try that to change in private? Palitan niyo yung yung nasa tabi ng ating properties ng private. Change it to private dun sa may parent class. Sige, palitan mo yun ng private. Palitan mo lahat ng private. Then run it. So, anong nangyari? Bakit nagka-error? Can you explain why, bakit siya nagka-error nung pinalitan natin ng access modifier na private? Anyone from the group or anyone from the class? Can you explain bakit nung pinalitan natin, nung protected natin, is nagka-error siya? Class.
Ma'am, kasi pati dun sa banda na child display ba yun? Is na private na rin, which is magkukos ng error kasi hindi na niya ma-access. Hindi na ma-print yung...
Okay, can you try na isa lang yung magiging private natin and the rest will be public? Or tanggalin mo nga yung yung tabi ng function parent display, tanggalin mo yung private. Sige, baba mo. Tanggalin mo yan. So, throw it dun sa may child class natin, dun sa tabi ng function, tanggalin mo din yung public. Yan. So, ganyan lang. And then, pagdating ng child message natin, gawin mo siyang public. Doon sa child class. Sa child class. Hindi kahit huwag na mo nang galawin yan kasi ano naman yun eh. Tawag dito. That is only a string. Palitan mo lang dun sa ano. Ito, yung sa tabi ng ating variable na child message, palitan mo yung private into public. Yan. Palitan mo yun ng public. Okay? Save it and run it. Na-access niya. Bakit niya na-access? Though it is already in private. Yan ba example 4 natin? Sinave mo, save mo yan. Yan. Naka-private ang ating parent class, pero naka-public ang ating child class. Paano natin na-echo yung parent display natin na function? Di ba, yung function natin, may echo pala siya. Dapat wala siyang echo kasi yun yung na-output pala. Naglagay ka kasi ng ng echo doon sa may function natin, nag-parent display. So, yun yung na-output natin. So, sa ating namang child, sa child din natin, ang na-echo lang din natin is yung wala tayong na-echo sa child. Ang na-echo lang natin is sa parent. So, hindi nag-inherit ang ating child sa ating parent. Kasi may echo. Tanggalin mo nga yung echo dun sa may baba ng function parent display. Yan, tanggalin mo yung yan. Yan. Then, run mo. Ayun. Kita nyo, walang na-output pagdating sa ating child class. Kasi di ba sabi ko kanina, if you use the private access modifier, it is internally accessible, but the child class cannot inherit from the parent class. Yun po yung gamit ng ating private. Ibig sabihin, para sa isang class lang po ang private natin na yan. Kaya ganyan yung nangyari. Pero pag protected natin siya, palitan mo na siya ng protected, yung private. Palitan mo siya ng protected. Save it and run it. Wala pa rin siyang wala pa rin siyang namana. Hindi pa rin nagmana yung ating child class kay parent kasi hindi natin ginamitan ng setter and getter. Pag ginamitan mo yan ng setter and getter, may mamamana na ang ating child class from our parent class. Hindi ka kasi gumamit ng setter and getter. Pero pag ginamitan mo yan ng setter and getter, though it is protected, still our child class can still inherit something from our parent class. Ganun yung Wait, try ko nga itong code ko. Can you remove your presentation? I'll be showing na lang yung ko kanina. The entire screen. So, screen. So, ito yung code natin kanina. Balik tayo kay inheritance. Kay inheritance na lang tayo mag-encapsulation. Ayan. So, pagdating ng class natin, balik tayo dyan. Public yan kanina eh. Public. So, naka-public tayo. Kaya, yan yung output natin. Pero, pag private natin, yung name natin, diba yung name yung in-inherit natin? Yung name lang yung in-inherit natin from our student class. So, if we're going to run this one, nagkakaroon na ng error. Ito yung in-output niya yan na name and age. Ito yan, nandito sa class yan. Ito sa function na getInfo yan. Pero, pagdating sa inheritance, hindi na niya pwedeng manahin ang ating name kasi naka-private na siya. So, private, meaning to say that this certain type of variable is exclusively for this class only. Nakuha? And then, gawin natin siyang protected. Pag-niran ko, may namana na siya. Kasi, di ba sabi ko nga kanina, ang protected is internally accessible. Internally accessible and pwede siyang ma-inherit ng ating child classes. Yan. So, pwede natin gamitin yung ating getInfo, yung getter natin, yung construct natin kasi ito na yung ating setter eh. So, pwede na siyang, it is already considered our setter and getter to get whatever na nandito sa ating class student na pwede nang mamana ng ating child class na department. So, yun yung kagandahan pag ginamitan mo ng setter and getter. Though it is already protected, the child class can still inherit anything from its parent class. So, paano nagagamit yung encapsulation pagdating ng paggamit ng access modifier? Yung encapsulation nagagamit yan, nag-hiding tayo, data hiding tayo. So, halimbawa, itong student natin na ito, gusto natin na sa kanya lang yung mga information. I-hide natin exclusively for this class student only. It cannot be inherited by anyone. So, doon pumapasok yung encapsulation na ibig sabihin, yung mga variables natin o yung mga properties natin, isa kanya lang, hindi niya pwedeng ilabas or hindi niya pwedeng ipahiram sa iba. So, nagkakaroon niya ng data hiding. Halimbawa, example ng data hiding din is, pagdating halimbawa ng tuition fee ninyo, di ba sa mga tuition fee ninyo is may naka-declare na doon na mga price na amount. Halimbawa is yung laboratory fee. Yan, laboratory fee. So, meron talaga siyang minimum amount na naka-assign doon. Naka-assign doon. So, kung halimbawa naglagay ako ng below the minimum amount, hindi yun i-accept ng ating system. Kasi, ibig sabihin nun, meron talagang allotted amount for it na kailangan na naka-hide doon sa ating system. Naka-hide siya that this certain amount is exclusively for this laboratory fee. Parang ganun siya. Naka-protect, naka-private siya na talagang ito lang dapat, hanggang dito ka lang dapat mag-start. Hindi ka pwedeng mag-declare kahit na maglagay ka na ng below daan na hindi niya tatanggapin. Hindi tatanggapin ng system. Wala siyang i-output. So, kailangan maglalagay ka ng fee is mas mataas dun sa minimum fee na nilagay nila, na naka-declare, na naka-hide. Naka-hide kasi yun sa system. Halimbawa, naka-hide sa system yun na nakakaalam lang is yung gumagamit ng system. Sila lang yung nakakaalam kasi kumbaga is naka-declare na yun sa system nila, naka-hide yun dun sa papel. So, ang nakakakita lang nun o nakakaalam nun is yung may alam dun sa system o yung gumagamit ng system. So, dun pumapasok yung encapsulation. There's a certain part of the system na ang nakakaalam lang or ang may alam lang talaga kung ano talaga yung nandun is yung gumagamit. Parang di ba yung example ko before is yung sa makina sa motor, sa sasakyan, sa halimbawa sa kotse, sa motorsiklo. Marunong ako magpatakbo ng motorsiklo. Pero inside the mechanism of that motorcycle is hindi ko alam kung paano gumagana. So, nandun yung encapsulation, which is, ang may alam lang doon is yung totoong mekaniko. Kaya din sa ating mga IT. There's some parts of the IT information technology student or professional na sila lang yung may alam na hindi alam na iba. So, ganun yung encapsulation, may data hiding. may hinahide silang part doon na sila lang din yung nakakaalam or sila lang dapat yung makakita. So, ganun yung paggamit ng private natin. So, private, sa kanya lang yan. Hindi mo siya pwedeng i-fire. Kasi may gusto akong itago or may gusto akong i-hide doon ng part of the system that exclusively for that certain type of variable only. So, ganun at ganun po yung encapsulation natin. So, are we done? Okay na ba tayo sa ating lesson? Okay na tayo, class?
Okay na, ma'am.
Wala nang further question. May question ba kayo sa ating mga reporters? Ano yung pa-activity po ng ating mga reporters? May pa-activity ba kayo? Quizzes and machine activity? Pwedeng
Meron po,
pa-see.
ma'am.
Okay, patingin.
Michelle.
Pakishare.
Machine po, ma'am.
Sige, pakishare na. Patingin ako. So we had this last two groups. I'll be seeing you next week. Ayan. Using encapsulation, use public access modifier to create a program code that will display the following result. Hindi, ang dali yan. Madali yan.
Private.
I want, protected ang ipagamit nyo and private. Huwag public. Kasi public na yung ginagamit natin eh. All the time, public. Palitan nyo. Gusto ko ng protected and then private.
Sige po, ma'am.
Wala na, hindi kayo magbibigay ng quiz. Sayang.
Magbibigay po kami, ma'am.
Sige, send nyo sa akin ha. Then ako na lang mag-upload sa canvas natin.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, wala na kayong question. Wala nang further, violent reaction. Question. Wala na. Okay, mag-attendance muna ako.
Ako, may question ako, ma'am.
Attendance tayo para may thrill. Para yung mga hindi umattend.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yes, what is your question?
Ano po yung benefits ng magpapa-activity po, ma'am?
Anong benefit ng magpapa-activity? Of course, it will benefit the reporters. Perfect agad nila. And then, syempre, mati-challenge ka na gumawa ng yung ipapa-activity nila. Halimbawa, yung machine activity. May natutunan ka ba dun sa report? May natutunan ka ba dun sa pinakita namin code? It will benefit you kasi pag may natutunan ka, mai-enhance mo yun or magagamit mo. Dahil pagdating ng fourth year, pagdating ng capstone, pag may natutunan ka sa object-oriented programming, pwede mo na siyang gamitin.
Okay po, ma'am. Okay po. Thank you po, ma'am. Thank you.
Attendance. Wait, mag-attendance muna ako. Extra points din to. Hindi ako mag-attendance lagi, sayang. Lagi pa na, almost perfect pa naman lagi yung attendance mo. Jillian Avalos.
Present, ma'am.
Acosta Adrian. Acosta Kyla.
Hey, ma'am.
Adarna, Bea.
Present, ma'am.
Risha May Bravo. Risha May Bravo. Wala si Trisha.
Present, ma'am.
Ay, meron. Luis
Mamada.
Enrico Cabalo.
Ma'am, always present, ma'am.
Always present ka. Corpus Christian.
Present, ma'am.
Nag-reporter yan. Korea, Rosemary.
Present, ma'am.
Del Rosario John Roy.
Present, ma'am.
Loreline Haduka.
Present, ma'am.
Aglibot Roan.
Present, ma'am.
Lodia Emmanuel.
Present, ma'am.
La Pastora Harold. Decodini Kiel. Kita ako kanina sa video.
Present, ma'am.
Ayun. Carl William Lopez.
Present, ma'am.
Lucero Marco God. Ang haba ng pangalan mo.
Present, ma'am.
Mark na lang. Mendoza Vanessa. Yan yung reporter kanina. Sayang naman siya. Hindi nyo sinabihan. Group 2.
Ma'am, nakapsot gamin net na.
Ay, nakapsot net na. So, sayang yung extra points niya. Sana gumawa na lang siya ng way kasi alam niyang reporting. Pag gano'n na may reporting kayo kahit sa other subject, find a way para makahanap ng signal. Sayang kasi. Padilla, Arlene Faye.
Present, ma'am.
Panganiban.
Present, ma'am.
Aldrin. Pera, Maureen, view or view?
View, ma'am.
View.
Present.
Parang beautiful. Ano? B-E-A. Beautiful. Season, Michelle.
Ma'am, present.
Villar, Joanne.
Ma'am, present.
Raymar Vidal.
Woo.
Okay. Sarmiento Warren, of course, present.
Present, ma'am.
Baroga Leia.
Present, ma'am.
Edwin Balang.
Present, ma'am.
Jose Raymond. Wala. Ryzen Tan. Ay, student ko pala si Ryzen Tan.
Nakatanood ba di ka man?
Pag wala ng question, kindly open your com for the documentation. Okay, documentation na kasi may i-announce pa ako after this documentation.
Ma'am, na-perde di kam kon. Sa taan, maka-open cam no, pa-exam ni Ma'am Nali, ma'am.
Bahala ka. Bumulod ka di cellphone. Yan, sige na. Okay. Smile, smile. Oy, Carl, Lorelei, Roa, Rosemary. Smile kayo. Smile again. 1, 2, 3. Sana makita ko na kayo ng personal.
Ma'am, nakita ka!
Teka lang. Sige. May announcement pa ako. Pakayin ko lang yung recording, ha? Wait lang.
Ma'am, nakita na ako.
Hindi na. Ituloy mo na lang magklase ng 11.